Hello, and thank you very much for joining us today, and welcome to our event where we are talking about how to create diverse and inclusive workplaces where people thrive. So my name's Chris Holland, coming to you from Charlton Morris. We're a global talent solutions business. Now, off the bat, we know that this is a topic that has been talked about and is being talked about quite a lot. And we are going to stay away from the well-trodden paths of all things DEI topics. What does it mean to you that you can find in lots of other places? Instead, we're going to try and really talk about that thriving piece. We want to help you and your business thrive, and having DEI and that agenda to help you do that. So without further ado, I'm going to ask my fantastic panel to introduce themselves, who are very much here to provide the expertise, and I'm in a facilitation role. So yeah, I can hand over. So Kesh, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Kesh Ladwa. I'm a former global head of talent acquisition for BBC News.
Great. And Rebecca?
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Bridger. I'm the founder and CEO of a people and organisation development consultancy firm called Hatching Ideas.
And Sylvia?
I'm a diversity, equity and inclusion coach, a leadership coach, and I help leaders create belonging and inclusivity in the workplace and also be confident.
Amazing. So we've got, I think something I'm really excited about is the range of expertise and the fascinating stories we've just been chatting about before we started here about that we're bringing to the table to talk about this topic. So it promises to be a brilliant conversation. So what we're going to talk about today is creating a meaningful DEI strategies for businesses, talk about implementing inclusive talent attraction and hiring processes, and creating cultures where people feel like they belong. And just before we jump into it, to box off the last bit of admin, we have got Dan, who's our silent and invisible producer extraordinaire in the background, who's going to be manning the comments. If you're watching us on LinkedIn Live, then hello and welcome. If you've got any questions, we'll be doing a Q&A at the end, which Dan will be manning. And similarly, if you're watching us on Zoom, then please use the Q&A feature, and we'll try and get to your questions if we've got time at the end. So without further ado, we'll get straight into it. And the first question that I would like to put to you guys is, what advice would you give business leaders who are thinking about creating or revamping their DEI strategy? Where do you start, Rebecca?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Kicking things off is well, we talk about revamping. I would say that most organizations actually are kind of starting out on their journey, to be honest with you. It sounds like a really basic place to start, but I do really believe in starting with your organizational values. Regardless of how you define diversity or what sort of characteristics, circumstances, etc., you have within your workforce, I would say what you're seeking to do is create a positive culture. And positive cultures come through developing alignment and connection with that culture. And that starts by going, actually, what are the values that we really care about within our organization? I would absolutely encourage you, and I recognize this as a business owner, how uncomfortable this can feel to do sometimes, but I really urge you to go, make that a conversation, not communication with your staff. Go out and go, hey, you've been with us for the last 3 months. You've been with us since the last 8 years. What do you think our values are and what do they look like? And that kind of sets your stage in so many ways for how you then create diversity. What I will also say is, try where you can to make your values verbs, not nouns. So, places go, oh, our value is in integrity, which is great, but you don't say, go have more integrity today. You tend to go, practice what you preach, or, be authentic when you're talking to your clients. Start there. And then after that, that gives you a great basis to go, okay, if this is what we share, what does that then mean in terms of how we turn this into communication for diversity and attraction, the way in which we make people feel as though they can and do belong here. And stop there.
Well, no, and that's what fantastic bit of advice to get us going. So, Kesh, obviously you worked in and do continue to work in global, senior talent acquisition roles and being at the BBC. And in your eyes, what are, important first considerations when we're talking about this topic? And as a business, who are looking to roll this off?
Around the strategy spend, just echoing what you said, is just making sure we're making statements. It's aligned to the vision. We're making clear statements on the organization, what we believe as an organization, and then making sure we're making those statements around how we want the staff to work as well, and being clear with that, so everyone knows exactly what that culture is, how the organization works, how the staff should be working, and then having those small objectives as well, because you can go full out, but it doesn't really turn into anything meaningful. But really kind of making those small meaningful objectives and for your staff and for the organization will help kind of set the scene for the organization, make sure you hitting the strategy correctly. Otherwise it just gets lost in translation, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think that a lot of what we've been chatting about prior to this is the fact that I think for that thriving piece is that the conversations about this topic have to continue when the meeting's over and when the door is closed, and it's not like, right, well, stop talking about the chat about EDI or DEI or ID or that we're having, and then we're going to go back and try and sell that printer that I'm trying to sell. It's having it ingrained in it. So I mean, Sylvia, when we're talking about like common mistakes that you've seen or that you can see, what are some of the pitfalls or the things people can get tripped up with when talking about this?
I think in this space, the common, as you said, the common mistakes is that when people regard the DEI strategy as just a token gesture, I think that it's really, really important that it is actually ingrained and intertwined with the values, with the purpose, with the vision, and with also the implementation of it, because you can have a strategy, it can be there in a document and it can be there as a strategy, but actually how does that translate to in practical terms? How is it implemented? How is that embedded within everyday behavior? Because as Rebecca mentioned, values are there, yes, but how do those values translate into behavior, conduct, interaction? And I think one of the common mistakes employers do is that they jump on this bandwagon of, yes, we want to be inclusive, we want to be diverse workspaces and workplaces and have a diverse work force, but actually it ends up being a token gesture. There's only just a few people there that are there for marketing purposes, but actually if you look at the organization top down, where is that representation? And I think sometimes that is a mistake that's quite common to see. I know people are intentional and their organizations are intentional in creating that change, but it is a mistake. And sometimes it's there in terms of marketing and social media, is that we've got that token brown person or colored person or somebody from a diverse background that's there. Great, tick box, representation done. But that's really not what diversity, equity and inclusion is about. So that's my perspective of some of the mistakes that do occur.
Kesh, you sound like that.
Yeah, no, totally agree with that.
I was going to ask about the pragmatic parts of what you're saying there about the implementation and how you do that. And I think that feeds really nicely back into what you said about the small steps.
Yeah, no, definitely. And some of the clear mistakes in this is definitely around the tokenistic gestures. Because the clear focus, is it about the visual representation? Is it about the numbers that you're trying to fill to be able to promote the organization to be a diverse organization and inclusive? Or is it just purely just get the numbers up?
Absolutely.
Is it number, is it visual? Are you going to spend, actually some of the stats were when Black Lives Mattered, the only budget that actually went up was marketing by 20%. And that was it. And it was just based on visual representation, but the calculation is wrong in total, because in some organizations they'll kind of look at it saying, look, inclusion, so diversity equals inclusion and belonging. But you need to flip it around and say, look, inclusion and belonging equals diversity. Diversity is just an outcome. You'll have a queue around the corner if you get it right. Every single person on social media will be talking about the organization. People will stay longer. They'll thrive. You'll have that diversity of thought. Everyone will be bringing their authentic self to the organization. You have less grievances. You have higher engagement surveys. It would just work, wouldn't it? It's common sense. So, but yeah, definitely kind of knowing your numbers and analyzing those numbers, because getting those numbers wrong. And then the final bit is just to do with the community, because engagement is totally different to communication. And there's all this a strategy, isn't it? And then you hear it and you don't hear no communication, no engagement with the actual staff network groups or even the community you're trying to be representative of.
Yes.
So there's no engagement. So when the strategy actually is launched, it doesn't resonate with anyone in your organization, doesn't resonate with anyone in your staff network forums or the community that you're trying to recruit the diverse talent from into the business. So also, are they resonate with everyone else does.
And then you see these, that my heart goes out, resonate both with so many of the points that you're both saying there, then you see these individuals who go, we've invested so much in this and it's just not resonating with anyone I feel for them when that happens, but you're going, but they haven't been part of the conversation because you haven't made it a conversation. You've made assumptions.
Our CEO is really passionate about this, actually.
Actually, he is.
In this hypothetical scenario, it's just the CEO in this instance. He's decided, he's decided to go right. That's what we're going to do.
This is what we do,
and then we bring it in, and that's how we do it anymore. But like you say, if the language isn't right and the method isn't right, and you're fishing in the same ponds and expecting different results, then.
And even that language, when we go we, we describe we, and there's often a tension, I think, between when we say we and we talk about the organization, and then you can notice a real disconnect very quickly when people talk about the business and the organization. It's not mine, it's not ours. That piece there when we're talking about some of the two bits actually. One, the mistakes that people make. I'm a big believer in observable behaviors. Those are your values, and you're going, okay, so what do we mean? Like, make that as real as possible and get people to say that in their language, that they go, yeah, that's what we mean here. That's the way in which we speak in this environment. But you've also got to be, really mindful of how you help people feel confident and competent to go, all right, it's all very well and good saying we'll call that out if it happens here. That doesn't mean I feel comfortable doing that. Okay. And the way I want to do it could be, put me at risk. It might go against how I feel. The other thing I'll say, and I'll then pass that on, is, there's a tension between the individual and the organization. And that can happen. But I think there's some very simple steps you can do to connect the individual to the organization. And I'll give an example in Hatching Ideas. Our purpose is to make a difference to people's working lives. That's Hatching Ideas but in an example where, Kesh, you joined us, I'd go, well, what does that mean to you? What does making a difference mean to you? And I'm inviting you to be part of your narrative and interpretation of a purpose that we share. And I know it sounds like a very simple thing, but that's a good way to be able to get people to then connect with, actually, I align and bought into this, and you've invited me to be connected to that as well. Yeah,
definitely.
And if on day one people are able to give their opinions and express their preferences rather than be dictated to about the way we do things, the way we do things, how we do things. This is we had a chat earlier, didn't we, about how culture can be, we talk about company culture, and that can actually be a real negative, because it can basically be a very thin way of saying that's the way we do things here. So actually what that can mean is actually you should look like this, and you should talk like this, and you should act like this, and you should watch this TV show, you should be into football, you should be into, or anything like that. And that culture can actually be, people talk about inclusive cultures, but they're not necessarily inclusive, and it can be used as a real destructive tool as opposed to a constructive one. I think just the second question, and Sophia, I wanted to ask you about this with regard to sort of some steps that I mentioned there about fishing in the same pond, expecting different results, which I think a lot of companies do. How can companies do more to ensure that they attract a more diverse range of talent? And when we're saying, we're not just necessarily talking about visual diversity here, like what do you think of that?
I think that's a fantastic question, because
thanks.
You're welcome. Because we want to have this diversity, we want to have this inclusion, but I think there's lots of different steps to it. So in the first instance, where are organizations looking to attract that talent? Is it just a set of universities where they're going to go to? And actually, that sometimes isn't the answer, because you can have that visual representation, but actually, is there diversity in thought? And going to say, for instance, asking employees within the organization, are they aware of diverse talent? That's one of the ways to attract diverse talent. But actually, I think beneath all of that, which is something that I want to highlight, is this conscious and unconscious bias, because you could have somebody who meets the visual representation, but they could still be biased and have these biases towards people of their own race or people of their own ethnicity. The key here is that how are you going to create this open space where you value the skills and the experiences of somebody beyond the visual representation? And often with the clients and within my own practice, people come to me because conscious and unconscious bias training is not sufficient enough. It really requires a safe space for coaching, for this thought process to be challenged. And I think when that is challenged and when that is overcome, you create this space where you can appreciate diverse talent regardless of just the physical appearance. You can appreciate a person for who they are, what they bring to the table, and their experiences. So for me, that's a key thing that I see within my own practice.
I think that is, I mean, what a powerful message from you just speaking about that there then, and Kesh, I'm sure you would attest to this, that how powerful that would be if I'm a candidate, and that what you just mentioned there is what I'm being told as a candidate before I join. That I suppose the communication of that message must be would be a huge attraction piece.
Go.
It's one of, for me, I think it's a very deep level part of it. Above that, on surface levels, you can do things like communicate your diversity strategy or your policy or your mission statement. They're all surface level things that you can do to make sure you attract that diverse talent. You could have CVs that are anonymous. You could have applications that are anonymous. Again, these are surface level ways of attracting diverse talent. But actually, once somebody's has got their foot in the door, is there in an interview panel, what then? What are you doing then to attract, not just to attract, but actually not only retain, but keep that person there, make them feel valued and going back to absolutely.
You know what, that goes down to the promise or the commitment, isn't it? Because the amount of time and effort it takes in recruiting people into the organization, and the film's not over, is it?
No,
I'm saying that from a BBC point. Movie's not over. You know, there's still trailers stage. The commitment's been made, isn't it? So you still made a promise to every individual. You bring them in, you recruit them for the right reasons, for everything that you're talking about. Develop on that, develop the individual, train the individuals, give them all the opportunities, make it inclusive, and then give that career pathway for individuals to come in and move around in the organization, which needs to be part, I think, probably more training and development needs to be put into staff in general.
I love the diversity of thought piece as well that you touched upon there. I think, and that piece around biases, we all actually we speak about this earlier is Keshan going, actually, I think there's a real kindness that we can have about our biases, because we all, it's a protective mechanism for one thing. It also means that we, don't have to process as much information. So we by our very nature have biases. And so the more comfortable we are with recognizing them and talking about them without judgment, the more likely we are to recognize them. I would also say that I'm very mindful as an employer, and when I work with employers, of how much actual skepticism there is out there of job hunters around going, they say this, but do they really mean it? And because of that, I think that actually so many employees have to go far beyond where you think you have to really connect with people to go, no, we mean this, and that's not just your voice. I think that's the voice of your employees going, this is what it was like. And it's the most powerful voice that you have, because, someone mentioned actually early on today going, oh, well, I don't think I could mention the fact that, I'm neurodiverse in an area. And I always have that moment of sadness when I go, oh, is that still our world? But yes, it is still that world, because we still carry that. And
and it's so hard, isn't it? Because there's, 2 points that have been mentioned already. Anonymous CVs and applications you mentioned there. On the face of it, as a quick fix or quick entry level into we do recruitment here, and we see companies do that, feels like a good idea, or can feel like a good idea. But then moving into that doesn't take the bias piece out of it.
No.
And it can actually mean that it can reinforce a lot of those biases, because it just makes it about, I think, Kesh, we spoke earlier, didn't we, about like how, we're a recruitment business, and we can get briefed on a role by a company, and it can become quite exclusive, because you want X amount of experience in this and this and this, be able to travel this amount of time and be managing a team of this and manage a budget of this. And you often get to a point where you can say, well, hang on, we're now down to a pool of about like 10 people. So, and then they'll say, yeah, but we're really serious about diversity and inclusion. And if it's that order, big long list of requirements, and then that has a bit of a footnote to it, and then you've got anonymous applications, it doesn't change anything. So,
I mean, anonymizing CVs and stuff, I mean, that works for organization. That's a starting point.
Yeah.
But the role that plays is trying to get the organization leaders to kind of start thinking and start sort of checking their biases, isn't it? At some point, once it's done, it plays its role. You just got to. It doesn't play a part anymore. You just got to take it away. It's not a long-term solution to that. It's a short-term, but it also kicks the can down. The problem just goes down to interview, because everyone's going to know when they're walking into an interview and say, "Oh, the name James is not English."
It's so true. If you've got a situation where there's probably going to be some discrimination based on name of a CV, then what do you think is going to happen by the time that person is then being sat down for interview? I'll say, oh, well, now any sort of is just evaporated along the process of, and that's the bit where there was an organization I worked with recently where we were looking at scenarios in the workplace, and it was around active bystanders. One of the scenarios that was generated was a situation where someone saw a CV with a name that they went, oh, I can tell already they won't fit in here. And I was going, I really think the problem here is probably a bigger problem than whether the name is on the CV. We should address what is going on with the fact that someone is, discriminating across. The challenge is, and I'm saying this is a worthy challenge to address, that it's easier to take out the names than it is, as you say, you're kicking the can down the line to go, I'm going to address that conversation with the person to go, this is, not okay, and this is why, and the even hardest, great English, Rebecca, is that the hardest bit is then to go, at what point as an employee do you go, you now fundamentally, that means we part ways. And I think it's the fear of that more, and I get it completely, that you then go, that's the worst fear, isn't it?
Yeah.
And empowering your partners as well. If you're a business, empowering the outsourced agencies and the partners you have to give you difficult information and tell us if we're not
trusting those people who will represent that.
Exactly. Sorry.
I was just going to add to the piece that you mentioned about the culture fit. The culture is about creating the culture to have these conversations, to create the space to have transparent conversations, open spaces, and this safety around the conscious and unconscious biases. And I think sometimes all this is beneath the level. People try and do the token gestures, but actually they've not looked within, and they've not looked at those spaces that are difficult and challenging to deal with, where the real conversations have to take place and have to be addressed. And that does go back to what you were saying, Rebecca, about values, and it goes back to the culture of the organization, not just a cultural fit, but actually what is the culture of the organization, what is the ethos. So I think that's really, really important to address, as otherwise it's just, the other steps that people and employers take, I think, can be just superficial. They're not really meaningful.
And Kesh, just because you're in a talent acquisition role, and I know that a lot of the people who will be watching this will be in human resource and talent acquisition positions. Is it a challenge to get that to maintain that message from talent acquisition and that initial process from that, and carry it through into the hiring managers and into that, and make sure that's all the way through? Is that like an ongoing education need that you think needs to happen in companies?
Yeah, it does. I mean, in talent acquisition, we're promoting the EVP, the employer brand, with the right tone language, they're including diversity. Managers definitely need to be trained. There's obviously discussions around whether training actually works around bias. Does it actually make an impact? But in some ways, it creates awareness, whether they accept it at that point in their training, or whether they down the line in their own personal life or in the next interview panel, something, penny drops and they think, oh, right, okay, I'll get it. It's got to be their own decision. The panel, the managers, it has to be their own decision. And yes, it has to be consistent all the way past, the recruitment process, and even past when someone actually starts and actually working in your organization. Because as I said, the movie doesn't stop, does it? I mean, it needs to carry on. People are still there. Everything what we've sort of promised needs to continue throughout the whole career journey, because the people managers, aren't they? They need to be people managers, manage the people.
Human managers.
I think
that's one of the things that have come out of the pandemic is, that I actually really try and encourage people to think less about, there goes my pen, less about cultural fit actually, but more about cultural alignment. Because when we're thinking about cultural alignment, we're not going actually, they fit in here. We're going, do you align with, what our purpose is, and to go back earlier, this is our organization purpose. Can you connect with that in an individual way so it's meaningful? So it's an us, yes. Do your values resonate and feel like that's authentic and don't jar, where you go, actually, performance is important to me, or whatever it is that's important. Do they align? And what that allows space for is to people to then bring themselves into that equation a little bit as well. So you're not just going, actually, I've now conformed into, I can have that alignment, but also bring my perspective into it. Kesh, the situation you're describing there, I think is so difficult because, as you say, you hope by giving people awareness of our unconscious biases, that will translate into their behaviors changing. I think it comes down to a very motivational level of connecting. Often people rationally understand the rationale behind it. That doesn't necessarily mean they've got the capability, or emotionally they connect to it. And until people emotionally connect to something where they go, I care about this, doesn't matter if rationally they do, or even if you give the skills, but it's an important piece, connecting with people on an emotional level that resonates with them, and there's some ways you can do that, is really important.
And that the training, the skills piece is really good, but even that, you need to know how to use the tools you've been given.
Absolutely.
Because if you know that you are a certain type of communicator, or you have a certain way of and we're not talking about visual diversity, we're talking about the way in which you operate and work, and that, then by having that, it doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden not biased to people who aren't like yourself, which is something that I think we touched on earlier, didn't we? So like moving back onto that.
Sorry, Chris, can I just add just
please.
a point that I think is really important, just that I see consistently throughout my own practice, is this space of clients coming and saying the DEI training, the information that we've received hasn't been sufficient enough, because as you mentioned, Kesh, it starts with the individual. And how do you create that transformation? And yes, it's emotional. Yes, there's all these elements, but actually nobody will truly empathize with being a part of a minority until they felt excluded. So how do you create that connection? It doesn't come from just information. And I always say this as a coach, is that information doesn't create transformation. It's actually action. Through the actions that you take, you create that transformation. For that to be occurring within an organization, the individual has to really go within themselves and think, hold on a second, when have I felt excluded? How did that feel? And who helped me in those moments? What helped me? And that's created through a space, a safe space, not training, not information. That doesn't create that. Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And that being and I agree, that's why I connect to on that emotional as what we sometimes try and do is go, imagine what it feels like in there. Well, I can't, and I guess that must be pretty, but I would say pretty much, I don't think I've come across a human who hasn't in some way felt excluded, and however that manifests itself. God, I was at a party and I didn't know anyone, or, Jesus, they came from a different school, or, whatever it is, if you can tap into that feeling,
absolutely,
of how it manifested for them, suddenly that emotional connection becomes so much more impactful.
Yeah, the things with that as well, that you don't have to do it on your own. You don't need to go through, yes, you need to go through that experience, but there's people in the organization, the network groups, the community who have gone through that. And there's those insight and learning that can happen. So reach out and use the support that you already have. Don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah.
And say, look, I don't know. I need to do. Can
we
you
get
help?
scared too, don't we? And then we're like, I'm going to put my foot into it.
Just
Something like
people will help. The worst thing is that you're sitting there and you think that you don't know and you're scared to ask. We're there to help. That's the whole about people make the culture and everyone working together as one. And that goes back to the values and making sure everyone's in it together.
It's about creating that safe space, isn't it? To feel vulnerable, to be able to ask questions, say, I don't know this, can you help me with this? I want to know you better, understand how you work better, so I understand myself. And it's that, it comes back around to that.
Yeah. Safe to fail.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Unbelievably, we've been chatting for half an hour. So I am going to move us on to, we've had some questions in from our viewers. We'll go for viewers, listeners and viewers, if you're watching it. So the first one is from Hasna, who said, revamping DEI by appointing the right people in decision-making roles, i.e. diverse people from different backgrounds, will add different viewpoints, which starts with the people, not the strategy on paper. So that's me terribly paraphrasing a point that we made earlier. Do we agree with that? Like, what do you do if your leadership team isn't, for want of a better word, diverse? What do you do?
See, that's a big problem in the situation. And going back to what I said in one of the earlier conversations and comments is, you can have a superficially diverse team, but if there's no diversity in thought, no diversity in experience, it kind of defeats the purpose of diversity and inclusion. It just becomes a bit of a superficial level. So I think this diversity of thought has to be part of the whole organization, top down. It's not just there in terms of marketing materials.
So what if you don't have that though?
I think then it should be one of the goals of the organization to try and bring those people in different parts of the organization and have that, because it's really, really important that that's seen and that's an active goal or, objective of an organization. And everybody has to start from somewhere. So this is the thing, I think it's really important for organizations to be open and transparent and say, okay, well, hold on a second, we don't do this. And but we have a commitment to do this. How do we do that? And get the right support, get the right consultancy in to create that change.
Step one, admit it. And then
absolutely.
Be pragmatic about it.
I'm just going to say, senior leadership in many organizations, public sector, private sector, it is not diverse. And you can't just go in and hire, fire and say, look, sorry, we're just going to reshuffle or get rid. Obviously, until the opportunity comes up, you obviously then go wider. But as senior leaders in the business, they need to be taking part of any job they take on. They need to take this part of their priorities. Also their objectives, because part of the review on any performance reviews on a monthly basis, most of the time diversity is in one of those KPIs or objectives in any performance review. It might be when you're in a probation, but no managers, managers having diversity objectives and say part of your performance, part of your bonus, or part of you being successful in living and breathing the values and being a people leader, diversity objectives, or when we talk about a small objective, whichever, and which makes an impactful change in the organization. As a leader, what have you done? As a leader, have you made those changes? Evidence that. And that's the moving away from the tokenistic gestures to actually impactful, meaningful, and accountable. And that's because great talk is great, but accountability and evidencing the change and the transition is probably more important, and that gives you the results. So
you mentioned the word reshuffle there. In the UK, we've seen quite a few reshuffles. So Rebecca, I think it's a question that is well suited to you. How can you measure whether DEI strategies are working?
The best measure I heard somewhere was and it was not so much D&I, but a positive culture. They went, how many places do they measure the amount of laughter you hear within the within the office space? As for me, I'm a big fan of data. However, I do have a bit of a grudge about data when it's associated with DEI. And that is because what tends to happen is it just tends to be data around either A, ethnicity, or B, gender. Maybe you've got age sewn in there as well. And we know that diversity is not just those characteristics. It's, we were talking about it earlier, it's also your cognitive diversity. Yeah. I worked with an organization recently where they were so pleased about the fact that they had all their measures in place, and just over half had said whether or not they did or did not have a disability. And so the fact that I think it was 48% of the organization didn't say or felt like they could say,
right,
that is a real problem.
Yeah.
I would add that I'm a real advocate of circumstantial data coming into play. And this really links with equity. It became a real passion point for me over the pandemic, where where people can be disadvantaged because of their circumstances. And especially as we're seeing organizations that hired hybrid and are now going back into the office. Do we know how far people are commuting? Do we know if they have small children, or whether there's I think there's a lot of trust that organizations have to do first to make it feel like we're asking this with all the right intentions. Yeah. But I think that's a real shift from just going diversity of characteristics to diversity of circumstances. Yeah. That means people genuinely have equity within the workplace.
And just probably just commenting on that, where you said about declaration on 40%, that comes down to probably transparency, probably staff having the commitment or trust the organization. Are they actually, I mean, have the organization actually delivered actually what they actually promised? Is things actually changing? There's all that perception, the amount of questions I probably get as well, asking, is this tokenistic? And is it just that you're asking me this because you want to get the numbers up?
What will that mean against me? Well, I'm doing okay right now, and no one knows. As a and that whole thing of belonging and bringing your whole self, but people don't feel as though they can yet to be able to say that there is. So to answer the data, I would really think about some circumstantial things and about, how we do that to help inform the decisions we make as a business.
And the danger of reporting on it, as you say, it comes to data and it becomes tick box exercise, and it can become tokenistic, like you mentioned, Cash, and so, I mean, which links really nicely into the last question, which is from Sandy, who said there's so much focus on attracting a diverse workforce that the focus can purely be hitting the numbers on the stats, and I think that can come more so in larger organizations. Sandy goes on to say this kind of focus really misses the point of the true value of diversity and the benefits that can flow from it, and doesn't engage hearts and minds in terms of buying in. So the question is, and Toby, if you'd like to take it, how can we and should we move beyond focusing on the numbers when it comes to that reporting piece?
I think it's really important, going back to whether you want to call it the culture, the environment, how people feel. It's really important that those people who are within the workforce, employees, have a sense of, are they supported? Are they valued? Are they empowered? Do they have the right support mechanisms to be open and transparent? And when they do that, I think that goes beyond just a tokenistic data filling exercise, superficial level, to actually creating that sense of inclusion. And that underlying all of that is the values and the connection. And I think that's the piece that sometimes data cannot actually, it can't be binary. It's not something that's captured with data. And that's, I think, sorry, what's that?
No, finish. And I
think that's really, really important to emphasize, is that is that culture there? Is that space there? Are those safe spaces there? Can somebody be supported? Can they be vulnerable? Can they be transparent? And when you have that, I think it really does go beyond just going, as the person mentioned, just the focus on the statistics. It goes on to that piece of inclusion for all, regardless of your diverse background.
You made me think of a quote that I always reference which is, not everything you measure matters, and not everything that matters can be measured, which is not the response that anyone in a business environment wants to hear. And they always go, all right, Rebecca, just because you can't, the fluffy stuff add, but it's true, that connection.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I mean, the data gives you the baseline, because you need to know what's going on.
Absolutely.
Facts, not fiction. So kind of knowing what the baseline is, and it gives you a starting point to what you need to focus on, analyze that data, highlight areas that you need to focus on, departments or areas which are doing great. So it gives you a picture, doesn't it? It gives you a picture and everything else. But yeah, with that, there's more to it. You need to kind of find out in the grassroots and speak to people, and that goes back to the engagement, because data is one part of the puzzle, isn't it? You need to kind of speak to your staff, speak to the employer, really trying to find out what's actually the truth, and not just basing on fact, not fiction, isn't it? Just numbers you can fiddle the numbers and make it look good as whichever way you want it.
I think bring it back around to hiring, and when we're trying to be inclusive and not exclusive with the way in which we hire, it means that we naturally have to put more of an emphasis on soft skills and emotional intelligence, rather than the really hard numbers, data-led things. How much have you sold? How many years have you done this for? But I think that will then naturally, hiring people who are emotionally intelligent, who care about this stuff, who are invested, who are value-led, will then lead into recording that progress, because you will have that. You'll have more people, won't you? You'll have happy people.
Well, we call it soft skills, and it's so hard, isn't it? Like there's an emotional toll. It can be so taxing, can't it? Going, today I've got 3 hard conversations that I've got to tell to someone. It's emotionally taxing. All the things that we talk about with our phenomenal leaders that we admire across the world. Public speaking, communication, influence, persuasion, human skills. I'm deaf to the soft skills. We are connected, but I think, great recruitment partners and great ways of automation things enable HR functions and business leaders to carve out more space to then dedicate to those things. Is my beyond that.
Well, we have, I think, 3 minutes left by my watch. So I'd just say, if anyone's got any closing comments, I could take one from each of you if you like. That's all right. If that's loads of pressure on you. But about how we can help the organisations thrive from a DEI perspective. So
for me, I think connection is key. I think that connection piece just trumps any data, any statistics, because it can't be commodified. So if you have that piece of having connection, and this goes from leaders, sometimes leaders are in their boardrooms and they're in those senior positions, but what are they doing to connect with those who they work with, even middle managers or senior managers? That connection piece amongst employees, amongst leaders and employees, and throughout the organization, I think is a game changer. I think that is a foundation on which so much can be built.
Rebecca?
Oh God, some amazing points, I'll say. One wonderful combination views across the board from everyone, and I just want to reflect that. It's been a real privilege. For me, I say go back to being human. Actually, I think in some places that's also completely new. And therefore, what I'll say is be kind to yourself as you go through this process. It really is a journey and an evolution, which doesn't really have a clear end point to it, because as soon as you've reached that next point, there's something else to sort of look at and examine. So be kind and empathetic. And the second thing I will say is ask, don't assume, don't make assumptions about your colleagues. Regardless of what you think about them because of how they look or how long you've worked with them, you would be amazed how many individuals, I think, have assumed a role within the workplace that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of what's underneath them.
Cash.
But don't be afraid to ask for help, and just engage with your network groups, your community. And I said, ask for help. You're not doing this on your own. There's a we. So ask, ask for support, but work as a collective, but also any interventions that you put in place, making sure whatever you promise you deliver. Don't promise anything if you're not going to deliver it, because it's going to have the most biggest negative impact. And then it goes into the fall of tokenist gestures. So yeah, just whatever you promise, make sure you deliver it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to all three of you for doing something in person first of all. Brilliant. It's been a great thing. Thanks everyone who's watched as well and listened and whatever else we decided that you're doing. If you did ask any questions that didn't get answered, then apologies first of all. But as you know, there's some brilliant conversation there that I'm sure could have gone for another 45 minutes. Feel free to send those in to us. We will be creating things off the back of this. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm sure that our panel here will be happy to answer questions as well, which we can include in the post-event comms. There'll be a PDF which you'll be able to download. We'll also include the details of our fantastic panel here. So thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for watching and listening. It's been a pleasure. And we'll see you next time, and goodbye.